Formosa. I assume you all got idea of what is Formosa. And I'm from Taiwan. Has anybody gone to Taiwan? Taiwan is very good place for surfing. You guys like surfing? It's very good one. And this is my name. My name is Awimura. I'm from Hojia. She told me she already introduced some of my background, and this is my wife name, GET.
Hello. Okay. So GET is my tribe's name, and the Daya is the subgroup of GET. And the history of my tribe is, I think, the most famous historical event is the Usa accident. Okay, Usa rebelled the Japanese colonial government. It's in 1930s. That story is currently filming by the director Wei. So hopefully we can see the movie next year. Okay, is there anyone from the North America here? There are some. Okay, this is the very common images. You also from North America? This is very common. We can see when I study in the States. And the awkward thing is that even until today, we can still see this kind of images show on the T-shirt or show on the posters. But is this really the images of the indigenous peoples today? I believe not. Okay, I believe not. And this is kind of the non-indigenous peoples, how they see the indigenous cultures across the globe. This is for the North American here. Okay, so I think the first part of my talk today is kind of give you a very general idea about the savages and how does those colonial countries use these kind of ideas to conquer the world. And this is the Roman Empire, the map. Okay, this is the map of the Roman period. And they kind of using the idea of savages to conquer the whole world. Okay, this is I think this one is in Greece. And the idea I want to show you is the sculpture here. The sculpture. They see these savages. They want to conquer them, and they kind of justify their conquer by using the idea of savages. Because you are savages, so I have the right to conquer you, to civilize you, to bring you back to the civilizations. Okay, so this is the idea that the ancient Greece they are using. And this is a very famous sculpture in where? Also I think it's in Greece. Has anybody recognized this one? Okay, so up here are the conquerors, and below here are those people who've been conquered, and they recognize them as savages. Okay. When the empire, when they conquer the savages, they have to kind of examine savages' teeth, whether or not their teeth is good or bad. If they don't have very good teeth, and they were gonna kill him. So it's the first requirement to be a slave. To be a slave is you must have a very good teeth to be the slave of the conqueror. and that's the only status for those savages you can acquire from the empire. So if you don't have those requirements, and they will kill you. Okay, that's the general idea. Okay, so that's the idea of the savages have been applied during the European, from the ancient time until the colonial period. And this also, we can see this kind of idea have been practiced in Taiwan by Japan, by dealing with the indigenous peoples in Taiwan. So there's one incident in 1874 that we call the Mudan incident. And the Mudan is in the southwest. It's in Pingtung County in Taiwan, in the southwest part. So the pretext for Japan's military action was related to events that took place 3 years earlier when 54 Okinawa. You know Okinawa, right? Yeah. So there are 54 sailors who have been lost on the ocean, and they sailed to the southwest of Taiwan, and they've been killed by the local indigenous peoples. So the Japan used this as an excuse to invade Taiwan, So this is very famous incident for the Taiwan history. Okay, you can see here, this is the indigenous people during that time. This is the idea being photoed by the Japan government. So shows that the indigenous peoples kneel down to beg for forgiveness from the Japanese colonial government, Japanese empire. Okay, so the colorful woodblock prints depicting the submission of the Taiwanese to Japanese forces is very popular. So this is the very general idea of the non-indigenous government to conquer, be careful, to conquer the indigenous peoples, and they used the kind of image the indigenous people as the savages. Okay, so this is a very general idea, we can see that. So this is the idea for a European when they voyage or cruise out to the new land. When they see the peoples in the new land, they kind of give the idea like that, the wild man. And this is the South America cannibals. Cannibal, the people who eat flesh, right? And this is very usual and common images we can see in the history book. Okay, back to Taiwan. Okay, so the idea of the savages and colonization of Taiwan's indigenous peoples. This is this distribution, the location of each indigenous peoples during the Japanese occupation time. And my people is in here, this part, the Samong Lake. Okay, my people live around the Samong Lake. Okay, so this kind of idea we can trace to the Han Dynasty in mainland China. There was a time the Han sailor whose name is Chen Di. He sailed to Taiwan and he met some of the indigenous peoples, and he describes the indigenous people of Taiwan as Dongfan, Eastern savages. This is the kanji. Okay, or in his record of the Eastern Seas in 1603. So it's like 15th centuries. And after the mainland rule come in the Dutch period. Okay, so the Dutch mostly occupy the southwest, the Tainan County. Okay, so they met a lot of we call the Pingpu, the Plains indigenous peoples, and they call them blacks or the Indians. Why they call them Indians? because during that time, almost all the European colonial countries, they named every indigenous peoples across the globe Indians. So no matter where you go to South America, you go to North America, you go to Southeast Asia, they all named them Indians because they thought they were on India. They were on India, so they call them Indians. So they based on their colonial experiences. So this is kind of the start of the Taiwan to start to encounter the European countries is 16th century. After Dutch is the Spanish. Okay, so after the Dutch, after Spanish, and after the Qing dynasty, and then we come to the Qing dynasty. They even named the indigenous people as raw or cooked. Okay, raw or wild. Define those people who has not submitted to Qing rule. Those people who had submitted to the Qing rule, they were named then cooked or tan. And the difference is that those who has submitted themselves to the Qing rule means they are civilized or very close to civilized. And those who never submitted to, they were uncivilized or inferior. So they named them raw and cooked. And this idea has been used by the Japanese colonial government. Okay, so they describe these people, the raw indigenous people, as vicious, violent, and cruel, and even concluded this is a pitfall of the world, and we must get rid of them all. Okay, so what happened by using this idea is that the Japanese government started to invade the indigenous territory by identifying those people because you are not civilized, because your culture is inferior. So we have to help you to teach you how to use your land so we can occupy your land. And until you learn how to use the land by our way, then you can have your land. So this idea has been used until today. Like under the ROC law, the indigenous peoples in Taiwan, they cannot have the fee simple title to their land until they continue to cultivate their land after 5 years, and then you can apply for a fee simple title to your land. So if you stop during these 5 years, then you have to recount until you can continue to use the land for 5 years, and you can apply for the proprietary right. So this is also the idea, because the government thinks the indigenous people have no idea how to cultivate them, how to use the land. Yeah.
Sorry, so the government has the idea to cultivate those lands?
The government
does the government, is it able to cultivate those lands?
Yeah.
So
they can use those lands.
Oh, it's usable.
Yeah.
It's easy to get there and cultivate it to make it like farms for the government.
Yeah. Okay. So if you are non-indigenous peoples and I'm indigenous peoples, both of us apply for a land. The government usually will grant the land to you because you are non-indigenous peoples, and your way to cultivate the land is different from myself. So even today, the indigenous people can only have a land to use the land, but not the fee simple title, until you continues to cultivate them for 5 years. After 5 years, you can apply for the ownership. Okay, so this is, but the idea is come from these savages.
Sorry. So if when they cultivate it, what about the result? What about the money? Do they have to pay some taxes to the government or
You
no?
mean for the indigenous peoples?
Yeah.
Or they don't. But after they got the ownership, they have to pay the tax. Before they got the fee simple title, they don't. Okay. Okay, so the idea of savages originated or from this guy, very famous person, the Charles Darwin. That he says that at some future period, not very distant, as measured by centuries, the civilized races of man will almost certainly exterminate and replace throughout the world the savage races. Okay, so this is the idea of what I have just talked is from the theory he has developed. But that theory is very famous, right? Okay, so the first part is kind of give you an idea what the indigenous people has been recognized in the past time, and the idea of the savages has been applied even in today's governmental policy toward indigenous peoples. For example, the hunting culture is very important for the indigenous peoples in Taiwan, also in other parts of the world. But even the government recognizes that indigenous people have the right to hunt, but you have to hunt under the regulation of the government, not by your own customary rules. And what kind of species is need to be protected, or how do we promote the environmental sustainability is defined by the government, not by the people who live within those environments. Okay, so it's kind of idea that the government don't trust in these people's ability to live with the environment, to live with the nature. So let's back to who are the indigenous peoples. Okay. The girl called Pocahontas, right? Very famous girl, Pocahontas. How many people don't never sing this movie? Okay, only a few. Okay, so I assume you all got the idea of the Pocahontas, but I kind of there are two lines of lyrics. It's very important to understand the situation of indigenous people today across the globe. Why their land has been confiscated, or why their land has been invaded, we can see from this idea here. This is the lyrics from the song of Pocahontas, right? So like she sing to the white sailor. What's the white sailor's name? I don't remember. Johnson, right? Johnson? Go. John Smith. Okay. She told him, "You think you own whatever land you land down." She told the white guy, "The earth is just a dead thing you can claim." That's the idea of the white culture. Okay. So no offense. Okay. But this is idea what Pocahontas told the white man. But Pocahontas said, "But I know every rock and tree and creature all has a life, has a theory, has a name." So this kind of give us a very important idea, the cultural differences and cultural diversity and cultural conflict between indigenous peoples and non-indigenous culture. How do we understand the land? How do we understand the nature? Okay, so from the European cultures, they see land is a piece who can own, who can claim by a person. But for the Pocahontas, those are related. We are all related. We are all connected. And then another part, I love this one. You think you are the only people who are people. Are the people who look and think like you. But if you walk the footsteps of stranger, you will learn things you never knew. Right? So this kind of told the white man, not everyone has to be like you to be a man, right? But for those colonizers, why the reason they can claim the new world as their own is that they identify those people they discover are not human beings. Okay, so that's the justification for the colonizers to occupy or to took away the indigenous people's name. So from these two lyrics here, so we can all go back to the idea of savages, as this is also the same idea for the Japanese government when they first time to invade indigenous territory. So they conquer them. Why they can conquer by war? Because if you are not human being, I of course can conquer you. Okay, so that's the kind of a reasoning for the Japanese government. They took away the indigenous people's land. Okay, so that's the historical background for the indigenous peoples in Taiwan, also in the world generally. So what the indigenous peoples in Taiwan has done since the 1950s. So we can see from the governmental policy the change of the governmental policies. Okay. In 1957, there's the ILO, International Labor Organizations. They promulgate the first international conventions to specify what kind of rights the indigenous people should have. This is the first international human rights treaties for indigenous peoples. So it describes that indigenous people should have the right to land, to employment, to all this social security and health, education, etc. But how do we protect these rights to indigenous peoples? We have to protect their right, all these rights, but we also need to educate them to become one of us, one of the indigenous peoples. So like the idea of this protection is based on the integration into the mainstream society, also to assimilate indigenous peoples into the non-indigenous society. Okay, so on one side, we recognize your right, but if you want to enjoy those rights, you have to become one of us, then you can have full right to all this. If you don't become one of us, then your right will be denied. Okay? And during that time, the Republic of China is still a member of the United Nations. So the ROC is one of the drafting countries for this convention. So they kind of implement this idea of paternalism into the domestic policies and domestic laws. So during that time, 1950s through the 1980s, the policy in Taiwan toward the indigenous peoples has three major ideas. The first one is to make the mountainous like the plains, to make the people who live in the mountains just like the people who live in the plains. The second one is they want to change the custom of the Aborigines to act like the Han Chinese. So this is to change their cultures. And the third one is to change the way of their living. So they taught them how to do the fixed farming. Because the indigenous peoples are like slash and burn farming. So the indigenous people will, in the government idea, indigenous people is roaming away in their territory. So they want the indigenous people to live in a specific place, and they can easy to govern, they can easy to control. So they taught them do the fixed farming. Okay, so this is the three ideas reflect from the 107 conventions. This is from the 1950s to the 1960s. And one scholar wrote in a paper, he says that under these changes, the indigenous peoples faced, particularly since the Kuomintang rule in Taiwan, changes in their traditional polity, society, economy, and cultures. In 1950, the government carried out the life improvement movement of the mountain compatriots, 三包生活改进运动, those the Chinese words, which not only included the promotion of the Mandarin speech in public education to the detriment of the indigenous languages. So I still remember when I was the elementary kid, we are not allowed to speak my own native languages. If we spoke our own native language, we got fined. We need to pay $5. I remember we have to pay $5 to do us the school funds, and they can improve the school facilities. Okay. So this is kind of an idea during 1950s to the 1970s. Okay, so things changed. When international atmosphere changed, the domestic changed. So in 1989, or it's the 169, the ILO, they promulgate another convention to describe the indigenous people's rights. It's the number 169. So they changed the idea of assimilation. So the assimilation ended. They focus on indigenous traditional values, organizations, and customary norms and laws. So they focus on indigenous land and traditional territory. So they not only recognize indigenous people have those rights, and they also recognize in a way can be understood and can be implemented according to their own rules. So during that time, Taiwan has a very rigorous social movement, not only for indigenous peoples, because that's the time just after the martial law has been lifted. Martial law was lifted in 1987. So after martial law, the culture of Taiwan has a lot of the social movement. One of them is indigenous movement. So during that time, indigenous people claimed the idea of return my land. Okay, so there are three movements, one in 88, 89, and 93. And in 93, the indigenous peoples even adopted the idea from the United Nations. That idea is the right to self-determination and also the right to self-government. So they not only claim to return my land, they also claim the right to self-government in 93 here. Okay, so those are the period during the international labor organizations. And since the 1993, we see a lot of progressions happen in United Nations. In 1993 is the International Year for the World Indigenous People. The goal, the United Nations required the member state to form the partnership, a new partnership with their own indigenous peoples. But that's just the goal. That's just the goal. So during the 1990s, we have a 3 constitutional reform, and we include the indigenous rights article in the constitutions. And in 94 reform, we finally got our name correct, because we used to be called mountain fellows, but right now we call ourselves as 原住民, which means the people who originally live here. Okay, and the mountain fellow just describe the people who live in the mountains, but not every indigenous people live in the mountains. We have the most population is called Amis. They don't live in the mountains. They live by the coast. So if we describe those people as mountain fellows, is not appropriate. Okay. So in 93 is the international year. So in order to implement the goal of the new partnership, the United Nations declared the first international decade of the world indigenous people from 95 through 2004. So they want to put this partnership in action. Okay. So in human rights, environment, development, education, and health. Okay, so idea is to implement the partnership. So in Taiwan, we also have a very significant progressions. So in 96, we have our own cabinet level indigenous agencies. We call the Council of Indigenous Peoples. And in 97, we got another constitutional reform. And in 98, the first indigenous law has been enacted. It's called Indigenous Education Act. In 2002, the DPP government, at that time, they signed the new partnership agreement with the indigenous peoples under the Chen Shui-bian's rule. In 2004, we have drafted our own indigenous chapter on the Constitution. Okay. And from 2005 through 2014 is the second decade in the international level. Okay, so in international level, they want to implement what we call MDG, the Millennium Development Goals, and also the UN promulgate the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. In Taiwan, the most important thing happened during this period is we got the Indigenous Peoples Basic Law here. And in 2007, we enacted another important law called the Traditional Intellectual Creations. We protect these ideas. Okay, and also a lot of new laws will be enacted in the near future. So we can see the parallel development from the international to domestic. So we can kind of envision the future of indigenous peoples, because right now everyone faces the climate change. So we are also have to deal the issue of climate change, especially right now, like I think it just finished in the Copenhagen, the COP15, the United Nations Climate Change Framework. They just got the 15th conference of the parties. Okay, so the indigenous people across the globe, they want to participate at their conferences, but the member state, they deny. They say because you are not a nation state. But the indigenous people claim that the United Nations says we are partners and we must implement this partnership. Then why don't you let us to participate? So the indigenous people have our own climate change summit in Alaska, Anchorage. So they also declare the Anchorage Declaration to express the standpoint of the indigenous people toward climate change. Another issue for climate change and its peoples is that because in order to decrease the threat of the climate change, almost the industrialized country has to decrease their carbon dioxide emissions. But some of the countries, they do the carbon trade. So this is another issue of carbon trade, because the carbon trade has to deal with the indigenous peoples. And those countries who sell the quota of the emissions of the carbon emissions are those underdeveloped countries like the South America, like the peoples in Amazon. So the indigenous people living in Amazon, they don't have a say about this carbon trade between the South America and those developed countries like United States, Canada, and Europe. So they kind of protest this kind of idea of carbon trade, because they are selling this forest, but they are not really selling the forest, but they are selling the quota from the indigenous people's area. But they don't get the benefit, they don't share the interest, they even don't have a say. So it's another issue for indigenous people. Okay, so contemporary issues for the indigenous people right now is the climate change and sustainable development. Like I just said, the carbon emission trading. And also in Taiwan, the issue is that the nuclear waste dump site. Okay, so because right now we store most our nuclear waste in Oki Island on the southeast coast outside Taiwan, but the capacity is no more. So the government has to find another dump site. So after by government saying they have done very careful investigation and evaluation, they finally find a potential dump site for nuclear waste, and the dump site still in indigenous township. So we cannot see the logic. We cannot fight through 2004. So they want to put this partnership in action. Okay. So in human rights, environment, development, education, and health. Okay, so idea is to implement the partnership. So in Taiwan, we also have a very significant progressions. So in '96, we have our own cabinet level indigenous agencies. We call the Council of Indigenous Peoples. And in '97, we got another constitutional reform. And in '98, the first indigenous law has been enacted. It's called Indigenous Education Act. In 2002, the DPP government, at that time, they signed the new partnership agreement with the indigenous peoples under the Chen Shui-bian's rule. In 2004, we have drafted our own indigenous chapter on the Constitution. Okay. And from 2005 through 2014 is the second decade in the international level. Okay. So in international level, they want to implement what we call MDG, the Millennium Development Goals. And also the UN promulgate the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. In Taiwan, the most important thing happened during this period is we got the Indigenous Peoples Basic Law here. And in 2007, we enacted another important law called the Traditional Intellectual Creations. We protect these ideas. Okay. And also a lot of new laws will be enacted in the near future. So we can see the parallel development from the international to domestic. So we can kind of envision the future of indigenous peoples, because right now everyone faces the climate change. So we are also have to deal the issue of climate change, especially right now, like I think it just finished in the Copenhagen, the COP15, the United Nations Climate Change Framework. They just got the 15th conference of the parties. Okay, so the indigenous people across the globe, they want to participate at their conferences, but the member state, they deny. They say because you are not a nation state. But the indigenous people claim that the United Nations says we are partners and we must implement this partnership. Then why don't you let us to participate? So the indigenous people have our own climate change summit in Alaska, Anchorage. So they also declare the Anchorage Declaration to express the standpoint of the indigenous people toward climate change. Another issue for climate change and the indigenous peoples is that because in order to decrease the threat of the climate change, almost those the industrialized country has to decrease their carbon dioxide emissions. But some of the countries, they do the carbon trade. So this is another issue of carbon trade, because the carbon trade has to deal with the indigenous peoples. And those countries who sell the quota of the emissions, of the carbon emissions, are those underdeveloped countries, like the South America, like the peoples in Amazon. So the indigenous people living in Amazon, they don't have a say about this carbon trade between the South America and those developed countries like United States, Canada, and Europe. So they kind of protest this kind of idea of carbon trade, because they are selling this forest, but they are not really selling the forest, but they are selling the quota from the indigenous people's area, but they don't get the benefit, they don't share the interest, they even don't have a say. So it's another issue for indigenous people. Okay, so contemporary issues for the indigenous people right now is the climate change and sustainable development. Like I just said, the carbon emission trading. And also in Taiwan, the issue is that the nuclear waste dump site. Okay, so because right now we store most our nuclear waste in Oki Island on the southeast coast outside Taiwan, but the capacity is no more. So the government has to find another dump site. So after by government saying they have done very careful investigation and evaluation, they finally find a potential dump site for nuclear waste. And the dump site still in indigenous township. So we cannot see the logic, we cannot see what's the reason behind those evaluations, because they search, so indigenous people has to be relocated. So it's very complicated. And also another issue is about the urban indigenous peoples, the employment issues, and also the education issues. So these are the contemporary issues we are facing right now in Taiwan. Okay. And then I believe you all know the Morak typhoon. This is the image we took from the internet. This is the before Morak. This is the river past the indigenous communities before the typhoon Morak. Okay, and this is right now. Here, the river, what we call that? The river banks or what? Can you see the differences? This is the before typhoon is like this, and after typhoon become that. So all this community has been wiped out. Okay? Some of the pictures I took after the typhoon. Okay? The bridges, the road have been collapsed. And also a lot of the, what do we call this? Anyway, we call that trees. Okay? But what do we call 漂流木? Okay, this is one of the port in Taidong, and the boat cannot go out because it was full of this tree has been flooded down from the mountains. So all this port cannot go out. And this is the east coast, and on the beach is all woods. So it's like, can you imagine that this wood has been occupied like at least 50 kilometers, the whole beach. 50 kilometers are full of this woods being flooded down from the mountains. Yeah.
So I think I've heard that the government accuses the Aboriginal people for like cultivating some kind of improper plants in the mountains, which causes the like causes erosion of the soil, and so such a big damage happened in Morocco. And so what's your opinion about that?
You guys believe that, or?
I've been in Nantou and I've seen like many binlang.
Yeah.
They're cultivating a lot of binlang there, and I think it's a bit like weird to see a lot of this kind of planet.
Yeah.
And scientifically, it doesn't help the
of course not.
Yeah. I don't know about Taiwan and Gulf. I haven't been there like for a long time.
But like I told you before, our land has been like took away from the historical times. So far, the indigenous people has the land we call the reserve land. Okay, and the total amount of the indigenous reserve land is like 260 hectares. It's like less than 10% of Taiwan. The total area is, the reserve land is less than 10% of Taiwan, and not all the 260 hectares are all owned by the indigenous peoples. Only, I think the area is also like 10% of those 260 hectares are owned by the indigenous peoples, and the rest of those land are still owned by the state government. Okay, are still owned by the government, and I believe more than 50% of those land, those private owned land, are leased out to the non-indigenous peoples, because we don't have that capital to carry out this kind of cultivation. So of course when we go up to mountains, we all can see those binlang, but most of them, I can tell you, at least 70% are planted by non-indigenous peoples. Okay, but those areas are within the so-called indigenous reserve land. But if we can look beyond what we see from our eye, you can understand from those stories. Those are not planted by the indigenous peoples. So how can we blame them for that? Right? And these woods are in upper mountains, and those mountains has been like being classified as a special zone for forest, for the conserved forest area. Within those conserved forest area, which means nobody can do anything there. Nobody. It's not allowed. Even you cannot go there to cut the trees. So why this tree came down to the plants, and there must be someone up there doing bad things to these woods. It's not indigenous peoples, because we don't have that right, and we don't have that. Because if you need to use these woods, you need a lot of like human power, and you need those facilities, and of course you need capitals. You need money to do all those. So it's not possible for indigenous people to do that. Yeah.
One more question. In my country happens that.
Where are you from?
Iraq.
Yeah.
I'm an Aboriginal people there too. So somehow when we get like some pressure from the government and they ask us not to do something, our tribes are doing it, even they don't care up to the government. So they cut trees, they build houses, and somehow they're just not obeying the rules. And what about Taiwan? I think it's human, and the way of thinking is almost the same. Maybe it happens somehow. So I asked a teacher, a journalist, and Zhongyang Sir, and she told me that there's reports that saying there are many lands in Kaohsiung that have been cultivated in that way from the indigenous people. So I don't know if it's true or not, because I'm not really believing those journalists. So I just want to ask if that's true.
I think to some extent, some of the indigenous community, I believe they really do that kind of things, but it's still very few. It's still very few. And I cannot give you a very exact numbers or what, But I believe there must be some people doing that kind of things. Yeah. Okay. Okay, I think back to this post-Morocco, because right now the indigenous peoples within those areas, they are facing a lot of urgent issues. Okay, and from all the reconstruction project, no matter is this implemented by the government or those NGOs, we have seen a lot of conflict. As you might also aware, since you all live in Taipei, I think before Christmas, probably on the Christmas Eve or on the 25th, there will be a protest from this typhoon impacted area. They will have a protest to claim their rights from the human rights based idea, to claim that the reconstruction has against their cultures. Okay, so right now I think the most important issue is the relocations for those peoples, relocations, because from the government side, they told the general public, they told the press, they told the indigenous peoples, your land is no longer suitable for living. Okay, so you guys must leave your hometown, and we can help you to build a new home in the cities. Okay, and you can start to build your traditional culture there. Does this, can you accept these kind of ideas? You can go to a new land and you can build your new home and you can develop your new culture there. Okay, and the government always spread out the idea that the mountain area is dangerous and we must let the mountain to recover by its own way. Okay, that's the kind of idea has been promoted by the government. But for the indigenous peoples, I think the most critical element to be the indigenous is that their connection to their traditional territory, their culture, their religion, their belief, their worldview is originated from their relationship to the land. So I was one time told by one elder in Taiwan who lived in this area. He can understand what the government has already told the general public, that we need to let the environment, we need to let the mountains recover in its own way without human interference. But from the culture of Taiwan, is one tribe in Taiwan, their culture toward these mountains, toward this nature, is that he told me we cannot let the mountains to be alone. We need to accompany these mountains because in this area there's one mountain called Dawu Mountain, Dawu San. That's the sacred place for Taiwan. And they used to live in a certain altitude of the mountain. And that place, he described to me that place is just like the breast of the mother. So they can get what they need in that area. So they describe the mountain Dao as their mother. So that's the very normal thing we heard, that the indigenous people call Mother Earth, Mother Earth. So this idea also reflects in Taiwan culture. They recognize this mountain Dao is their mother, and they live in a certain area. It's just like the mother's breast. They can feed their children. And while they have been moved down to the plains, that's because since the Japanese government, like idea from the savages, we need to teach you how to live in a civilized way. So we need to relocate you to the plains. And we need to teach you how to do the fixed farming. So you need to move down to the plains. So that's the reason we can see the indigenous people in the plains area, because originally they live in their traditional territory. Okay, so in response to the government saying that we need to let the mountain recover in its own way, the Taiwan people say we cannot let our mother to be alone. They need us, and we also need them. So that's kind of the cultural conflicts here. So I think we must have we must make a decision on this idea of cultural diversity or multiculturalism. How do we understand the other culture? How do we show our respect to the other culture? I think we need to have more conversation, and we need to have more communication to let the people on both sides understand both two different stands. It's not conflict. We can find a way to accommodate each other's. I think it is possible. It's possible because we can see the experience in Australia, in Canada. The government has formed a partnership for the local indigenous peoples. We let you guys to govern the natural resources because we know you can do better than us, because we are not the people who live in that area. You are the people who live in that area, so you know the nature, you know the environment. Because right now, like I said, Taiwan already has 6 national parks, but who make the decision for those national parks? How do we conserve, or how do we do the sustainable development within those national parks? Not the people live there. The people who make decision to those national parks are people who sit in Taipei offices. Even they never been to national parks, and how can they make any decision to the environment? Right. So I think we can still find a way to accommodate each other's needs. So back to the relocation, because the very important element for the indigenous peoples to be indigenous, you need to maintain your connection. You need to maintain your relationship with the land, with your mother, with your traditional territory. Once the relationship has been cut off, the indigenous people they will start to lose their culture. Why they will lose their culture? Because the indigenous peoples, one of the reasons they have their own language system is that they develop their language system by identifying their traditional territories, by be acquainted with their environment. So they have a very good naming systems. So if you go to if you ever go to the indigenous communities, they can always tell you a lot of stories from their ancestors with their lands. And some of the indigenous land are named by historical stories, right? I think it's kind of a same idea in the North America, because some of their names are very, how to say it, very reflect what their life is. Like one time, I still remember, one of my professors told me the one of the Indian peoples in Arizona is called Navajo. They have their name is like the white horse riding, or they just have a name who has like, if you are very good in horse riding, then your name probably will be horse riding, and then it's very unusual for the non-Indians to hear this kind of name. So sometimes they introduce each other, and then they told him, oh, I have a friend who is like horse riding, and the non-Indian will say, who is on the horse, like this kind of idea, but that person name is horse riding, something like that. So for the indigenous people, we also will name our children by our stories with the land. So if you relocate indigenous peoples from their traditional territory, the source of their culture will be cut off, and the language will not be continued. Because how can we teach our children our traditional histories, or our legends, or our sacred lands, but not showing our children those places? It's very difficult, and you cannot teach by imaginations, right? So you have to show your children the real place, and you can have a direct interaction with this area, and the culture can continue to grow. So right now the indigenous peoples are against this kind of forced relocation policy by the government, because government do not do a comprehensive investigation of traditional territory. They just do the investigation on this impacted or devastated area. Of course, right now, anyone who go there do the investigation of the land, we all can come to a conclusion that place is not suitable for living. But indigenous people, traditional territory is not only limited to that area. Indigenous people's traditional territory, including the fishing ground, the hunting ground, the gathering ground. So the area is huge. I remember the government has completed the investigation of the area of indigenous traditional territory, and it covers 80% of the Taiwan. It covers 80% of Taiwan. So what I want to say is that we don't have to really relocate those people into the cities, because if we can find a suitable place for they to build up their own communities, to continue their culture within their traditional territory. And we can still do that way. But the reason the government refused to do that is that, like I said, it's less than 10% of reserve land are owned by indigenous peoples. And less than 10% of that 10% land are owned by private persons. And most of land are state-owned. And state-owned, most of the land are owned by the Forestry Bureau. And the Bureau has the biggest responsibility for those woods which came down to the oceans. And the government refused to let the indigenous people to use those lands. The reason has go to the main idea of what I want to share with you is that the idea of the savages. Because the government don't trust indigenous people to have a good way to use those forestry area. So they refuse the indigenous people go back to the traditional territory, because those traditional territory are classified as the conserved forestry area, which means you cannot do anything there. Okay, you cannot do anything there. So I think all the reconstruction has been carried out by the government, including the relocation, is all based on the idea has developed from the ancient time until today. The government just don't trust indigenous people's way of cultivating land, the way of indigenous people to use the land. They just don't trust, or they just don't believe indigenous people can use the land effectively and also ecologically. I think that's the main idea. Okay, and also another issue from this post-Morocco reconstruction is that we see a lot of we call it charity violence. What a charity violence means is that, I don't know whether is there anyone ever donate or share do the charity things to the, how do we say that, to those beggars on the street. And what's your imagination once you gave away your money to the street persons? Are you assume he will use that money to buy foods, or to buy cigarettes, or to do other things? Okay, so right now this charity organization, they think because I gave you the money, okay, so you need to follow my way of doing things. If you don't follow my way of doing things, and then you against my will. And those charity organizations, they just don't understand. We build the houses for you. We provide you the employment. We provide you the house. And then why you guys still want to go back to your traditional territory? They just can't understand. They just think you are unreasonable. Okay? You people are, how to say it, absolutely unreasonable. Okay? So this has a huge conflict between the charity organization and the indigenous people's needs. When we give away our charities, it doesn't mean that these people has to follow your way. As long as they use these funds in a good way, that way can help to build up their cultures, can continue their good way of living. Why do we have to ask them to do the way we want them to. Okay, I think there are huge like cultural conflicts here, and it just reflects what governments think of indigenous peoples. Yes.
One more question. So let's assume that the government will give them the lands that they want and they can communities that they will like they ask for. And also we know that every year in the summer there's really big typhoons coming into Taiwan. It makes those to 失掉. So here we're concerning about people's safety. Let's say, what is their requirement to the government if such a next like something like Morocco happens again? Do they complain directly to the government? Because then they don't have this right, I think.
Of course they will.
So they ask to live there and they also complain to the government is like.
I understand your point.
Yeah.
Okay. This devastated area was not chosen by the indigenous peoples themselves. We don't have choices where we want to live, where we want to relocate. This area was determined by the government. We want you to live in this area. Okay, it's from the Japanese time, even from the Kuomintang rule in 1950s. Okay, and during that time, Taiwan do not have huge development within the mountain area. So indigenous peoples are safe. Okay, but why indigenous people are faced threat from the landslides? Because the government, I think you guys heard about the Cape number 7. Everything is BOT, build, operation, and transfer, right? So all those mountainous areas are BOT by the government, leased out to the corporation, leased out to huge industrial companies. So who has to suffer the threat in the downstream river? The indigenous communities, right? Okay, and then back to another point. Why indigenous people, they still want to go back to their traditional territory? Because the evidences show that most of the historical site, when I say historical site, is not something we cannot identify. A historical site is actually exist today. And those historical sites, after all these years, typhoons, earthquakes, those areas are safe, has no impact, has no devastations. So so this evidence shows that in these indigenous communities do have the traditional knowledge to live in harmony with the environment. That's why their ancestors pick all that place for their traditional communities. And the reason why they've been forced to relocate is government will, because government want to develop the natural resources. And indigenous people does not ask that no matter where, no matter what kind of land you give us, we can go there. Indigenous peoples are asking those areas used to live, used to occupy, used to cultivate by their ancestors. That traditional territory is not like a random land. Okay, so it's not like that. And of course we cannot envisage what will happen in the following years, because the climate change threat nobody can like predict. So even right now we said, okay, you guys can choose whatever you want within your traditional territory, but government cannot saying that because this is your decision, so whatever happens in the future, you cannot brand us. You have to take the full responsibility. But that's not the state should say about that, unless the state stop every development. start every construction within those areas, but it's not possible, because how can we plan a devastation to a particular region or to a particular development? Because there must be a lot of causes, and there must be a lot of the different reasons beyond the devastation, beyond those things we see. Right? So we cannot accuse to indigenous people's decisions because you want to go there, so you have to take responsibility. I don't think that's reasonable to say that. Okay, so right now we are facing the successive reconstruction and restoration of the indigenous affected regions. I think it is very important right now, both for the indigenous peoples alone and also for the government, because back to the Constitution, Article 10 of the Constitution Amendment said the multiculturalism is the foundation of our Constitution. So what does the multiculturalism means is that we need to respect every culture. We need to create a good environment to make all kinds of culture to coexist with each other. So I think this issue is one of the case we can test. How does the society of Taiwan to understand the idea of multiculturalism in the Constitution, in the society, and within the peoples? So I kind of give you from the start the idea of savages and how the government kind of manipulate this idea into their policy toward the indigenous peoples. In the early times, they used this idea to conquer indigenous peoples, to take away their lands, to justify their invasion. And in the modern times, they still use this kind of idea to say the indigenous peoples need to progress, they need to learn the civilization, need to integrate into the modern society. But all this idea is against the multiculturalism, because the multiculturalism means that every culture is equal. We have equal status, and we need to coexist without discrimination. Okay, so this kind of the idea I want to share with you about the indigenous peoples in Taiwan and their modern situation and their urgent needs right now. And I think we can have some questions and discussion. We kind of have 10 minutes left. Thank you. I want to teach you, this is my native language, to say thank you. Mo hoao su ba lai. Yeah, thank you. It looks like English? Yeah, because we use the Roman character, because we don't have the characters, so we need to adopt this kind of character to write our languages. But the pronunciation is different from English. Yeah, similar but different. Okay.
Questions? If you
the government hasn't made a final decision about the relocation of the Aborigines after the typhoon?
So far, not yet. But they have already completed a full investigation of those areas, and over 90% are unsafety. But because those investigation is by the so-called experts from the government, and they don't invite it from the expert recommended by the indigenous peoples, and they didn't invite the community members themselves to participate in these investigations. So they still need to do a second round investigation, because that the law of the Typhoon post-mortem rock reconstruction law says that if you want to relocate these communities, you need to get the community consensus. Unless you get the community consensus, you cannot relocate them. But what does the consensus mean? You know, it does the 51 to 49 can identify as the community consensus. But I think in English, consensus means 100%. But in government saying 51 over 49 means consensus. Okay, so that's the problem. Yeah, and because the government does not invite the indigenous communities to participate in this like land investigation. So from the grassroots level, a number of indigenous NGO has invited, and some of the academic people from the university, also from some other fields, they form their own investigation group. They also do these kind of things. But because the truth is that we need money to support this investigation, so it's not very effective, just like the government do. But some of the community, they still want to do some investigation, and they can have their own evidence, and they can talk to the government when and where we can move, and or is that necessary to move out of the traditional territory? Yeah, I think that's the progress so far, and because the government hasn't agreed to do a parallel research from the community, also from the government. So like I just said, the people from this area, they will have a protest on Christmas, and they will also invite some of the international reporters, because this issue needs international exposure, because our government always pay attention to domestic issues if you got international exposure, right? Because our government, most of them are getting their degree from the States, so they very care about the international exposure. So that's the strategy we are going to use to invite international reporters. Yeah.
Sorry. When we talk about the government, it's the blue government, right?
Yeah, of course, because they are the ruling party right now.
So you mean that the Green Party, they have, they are more promising to your issue?
I don't see that way. When you say Green Party, are you saying the Green Party in the States or the DPP party? Because we also have Green Party in Taiwan.
I mean the Green Party in Taiwan. I mean Ma and
the DPP?
The DPP, yes.
I don't know what do you think of these two parties, because for me they are all the same.
For me, it was all are the same too. And when we are talking about people, I think both political parties, they are just care about their positions, and they don't care about any kind of people's issue that much.
I think that let me take an example as saying they are the same. Because before the DPP came into power, the real estate in Taiwan is very high, especially in Taipei. So the DPP government, before they came into power, they are promoting kind of like a socialism idea of socialism. Yeah. And once they came into power, they just do things like the KMT does. they forgot what socialism means, and they all go after the capitalism. Yeah, so the real estate is continue to get higher and higher. Yeah, so for me they are the same. Yeah, I think that's politics, right? You say one thing and then you do another thing.
So kind of, will we like won't we see a green color in that protest in Christmas?
What?
That there is no green color in the protest in Christmas.
Of course, there are gonna be a lot of green colors there because they are the opposition parties right now. So they have to stand against the government, no matter what issue you are. Because if this issue is against the ruling party, and they will be there.
But don't you think that will like act oppositely into your issue? Like it will be an act opposite into your issue.
Into my issue?
Into that Aboriginal issue. Indigenous people issue. That if the government see like they are politicians and they see color, like green color people are protesting and they say no, it's political issue. It's not a human right issue. Don't you think so?
I do think so, but it's kind of a politics, right? So you still need other supports before they can into power, and then we can negotiate from there. And we need, I think indigenous people should be maintain certain relationship between these two parties. We cannot like, oh no, we don't want to talk to any of you. We still have to communicate. Not like if you don't listen to me and then we cannot talk. We have to find ground that we can start talking. Yeah, and what will happen will from what we start to talk. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah. Hannah. Yeah. What do you think about your ancestors do?
I was very surprised because in my especially my generation or our generation, we don't really learn how Japanese people about it. People go small incident. So, I didn't know that such a big things happen. So I feel very ashamed,
I think it's always good to go back to history, and then we can get more understanding between each others. Yeah.
I think first of all, I'm from Hong Kong, been for the 4 years in Taiwan for 4 years, and I always hear about the original people. They complain and how the majority treat them, and I would say that people around the world was always focused, how the Europeans treat their people in the colony, right? But none of them mention about how well they do in Singapore and in Hong Kong. I mean, let's say back to the old China, they was invaded by the foreigner, right? I would say if your civilization and your country easily invaded and conquered by the foreigner, there is something wrong about it. I don't mean that you have to give up your culture, because for me, each culture have their weakness and advantage. That let's say if my civilization in my country and was invaded, colonized by foreigners, I would say, then we have to go back to review what's going wrong in my country. Then I easily invaded by other foreigners. That if I know the foreigners, even they are my enemy, I will learn from them or the skill from them. Also, if they make mistake, I will learn from them mistake and for my lesson and civilization or culture more successful. I would say Singapore and Hong Kong is the best example for that.
Okay, I think I understand what you were saying, but let's go back to can we not justify? Can we classify the degree of different cultures? Can we say the culture in Africa is inferior to the United States cultures?
I would say they're inferior, but obviously they have some weakness in there. I would say they have advantage, that they have weakness. I would say they will. Even I'm Chinese myself, we have to learn from other countries.
Yeah, of course we have to learn, but can we can we force them to learn other countries' cultures?
Well, no one forces, but if you don't learn and adapt, then you face the consequences. That's how it is.
Okay, I think that's stuff from the colonial period. Okay, the reason why the colonizer want to invade other countries, what's the main reason?
That's their mistake too. Now, they colonize other people, that's their mistake too. Now you see the United Kingdom, when they colonize around the world, they break apart. They face the consequences. That's their mistake, and we learn from that.
Anybody want to have something?
Each civilization, each community will have a different set of values. Yeah. If European values definitely encounter colonialism, economics plays a large part, military plays a large part. Maybe they're more successful from a military point of view and in their economical point of view, but if you look at an ecological point of view, what have they done?
So I would say the European culture have this advantage and have the weakness too. So we learn from the advantage and we learn the lesson from the mistake and the weakness part.
What choice do you have to learn from a culture whose values aren't based in military and economical point of view if you go with your military values and destroy their culture?
For me, the European advantage is their science. Is the most advantage, but their political system and their colonized part is something we can learn from.
But I think it doesn't change the fact that, I mean, even if for you, in your opinion, the political system, it's not perfect or something.
It's not perfect, yeah. For me, there's no political system perfect.
Yeah, it's not, but at the end of the day, it's the one that is predominant around the world. And it's the one that is oppressing the other ones.
Yeah, so I would say that's the weakness.
That's the weakness.
The advantage is they have the way to improve technology, improve the standard life, the way to business, the advantage is we Chinese don't have to learn from that. But the way they colonize people and the way they run their financial system, that is the weakness, the mistake. We can learn from and improve
You can say the methods are better. Yeah, you have American science made nuclear physics. You have the technology, but it's how you apply it and how you use it which is important.
The world will be a lot more peaceful with nuclear weapon. If there's no nuclear weapon, there's no everywhere.
Okay, I think I really love to continue this conversation, but I don't want to occupy other students' time. So I'm very glad we can have this kind of very inspiring for what we have talked. So hopefully we can have another chance to continue this conversation. Thank you.